Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tale, where secrets slip, lies unravel, and the truth always has a twist. Real stories, raw confessions, and shocking betrayals. Drop a comment if you've ever caught a red flag too late. Now let's get into today's tale. My father demands my apartment be transferred to his name, but I told him, maybe ask the daughter you brag about at every family dinner. You should sign the apartment over to me, Lorna. It's only right. Why would I do that? Because I'm your father. Because I helped you become who you are. Did you maybe ask the daughter you brag about at every family dinner? That's what I said to my father the last time I saw him face to face. And now the family is turning against me. My sister wants me to understand where he's coming from. And a few relatives have called me ungrateful for involving a lawyer. But they weren't there when I was clawing my way out of a bad marriage. They weren't there when I cried myself to sleep, in a one-bedroom walk-up, surviving on instant noodles and double shifts at the hospital. None of them know what it's like to feel like the family's afterthought until they want something from you. Now, I'm questioning everything. I didn't always expect to be alone at 39. I thought life would look different. Not necessarily easier, but more settled. I have a decent job, a stable roof over my head, and peace in my daily routines. But when it comes to family, well, that's the one part of life that never seems to make sense, no matter how old you get. My apartment sits on the 4th floor of an aging but charming brick building in Prospect Heights. It's small, but every inch of it is mine. I bought it 6 years ago with a modest inheritance from my mother, and a whole lot of saved-up grit. The paperwork has my name and no one else's. I paid the closing costs. I chose the furniture. And I peeled off the old wallpaper with my bare hands the first week I moved in. It is mine. But in my father's eyes, that word mine doesn't exist unless it's tied to him. My father's name is Victor. He's 72, a retired plumber who still insists on being called the man of the house, even though the house hasn't been his since 2011. When Mom asked him to sleep in the guest room for a while, and never invited him back into the master bedroom again. That was around the time I was going through my own implosion. A divorce from a husband who thought yelling was the same as problem solving, and whose idea of intimacy was passive-aggressive silence. It's funny how family patterns repeat. Victor never hit us. He didn't need to. His power came in silence, in glares, in the way he spoke over people at dinner tables and called it leadership. His love came with conditions. His pride came at your expense. And somehow, growing up, I accepted that. But as an adult, as a woman who has built something for herself, that tolerance evaporates. The request, or demand rather, came out of nowhere. It was a Sunday. I was folding laundry and sipping iced coffee when my phone rang. I expected small talk, maybe a reminder to visit sooner. What I got instead was, "You should transfer the apartment to my name." At first I thought, he was joking, but Victor doesn't joke, not unless someone else is the punchline. He said it calmly, as if it were logical, like passing on a family heirloom, except I'm still alive. Still paying property taxes, still mopping the floors I cleaned last night, still standing in the home I built. And yet to him, it was already his. I was stunned into silence. He kept going. "It's just safer this way, in case anything happens to you." I replied, "If anything happens to me, I have a will." That's when his tone turned. "Don't get smart. You think your apartment just came out of nowhere? Who do you think raised you? You think your independence came from thin air?" There it was, the real root of it. He sees my accomplishments, my degree, my career, my home, as extensions of his sacrifice. Never mind that he didn't attend my college graduation. Never mind that he told me marrying Javier, my now ex, was the best shot I had. Never mind that he couldn't be bothered to drive me to the emergency room when Javier dislocated my wrist, during an argument saying, "If you provoke a man, he'll act like one." That history, it's invisible now. Because I'm supposed to hand over everything and say, "Thank you for your service." I didn't. I told him, "Maybe ask the daughter you brag about at every family dinner," and I hung up. I knew the fallout would come. It always does, like clockwork. Nina, my younger sister, called the next day. She's always been his favorite. Ivy League degree, professional pianist, 2 kids, married to a man who manages an absurd amount of money for rich people in Tribeca. They have a lake house in Connecticut and an au pair named Sophie from Sweden. "He told me you were disrespectful," she said. "He tried to claim ownership over my home, Nina. He's just old. He doesn't know how to ask for things." It wasn't a request. She paused. Maybe just humor him. There it was again. That word. Humor. As if my boundaries were a punchline. I didn't entertain it. I told her he crossed a line, and I wouldn't be handing over my property to someone who's never respected my choices. She sighed and said, "You know how he is. Like that absolves him of every emotional landmine he's planted in our lives." Then she changed the subject to her daughter's piano recital and acted like none of it had happened. That's how my family deals with problems. They turn down the volume until you start to think maybe you were the loud one. But Victor wasn't done. He started calling my building's management company, claiming he was the new owner and needed access to my HOA statements. I only found out because I got a warning letter from them asking why I hadn't reported the transfer. I was mortified. Not because of what they thought, but because of what he thought he had the right to do. I called him. "You crossed a line. I'm trying to protect you. What if something happens? Are you planning to kill me, Victor?" That was the first time I used his name. Not Dad, not Papa. Victor. It hit him like a slap. "You think I'm trying to steal from you?" I didn't respond. He knew exactly what he was doing. Then came the unspoken threat. "You'll regret this when I'm gone and you're alone." I hung up again. And that's when I hired a lawyer. Not to sue him, just to put up a wall. A legal cease and desist letter to stop him from contacting my building or implying ownership. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. He showed up at the building 2 weeks later. My doorman, Calvin, a kind middle-aged man who's seen it all, called me upstairs. "Ma'am, there's an older gentleman downstairs demanding to be let in." Did he say why? "He says he owns your place." I looked out my window and saw him standing in the lobby, arms crossed in that same weathered windbreaker he's had since I was a child. He looked like a man waiting for someone to apologize for a crime he committed. I didn't go down. I watched until he left. Since then, the silence has been loud. He hasn't called. Neither has Nina. But I'm getting text messages from cousins, from an uncle I haven't seen since Mom's funeral. They say things like, "Family is all you have, and he's an old man. Just let him feel in control." But control is exactly the thing. He's never learned to give up, and I'm done being his consolation prize. The messages kept coming, passive-aggressive attempts to guilt me into submission. My cousin Clara, who once told me to just stop complaining when I cried at my mother's, Wake sent me a multi-paragraph text about honoring our elders. I didn't reply. I didn't feel like explaining again that honoring someone doesn't mean sacrificing yourself on the altar of their ego. The last straw was when someone left a voicemail on my work phone, a restricted number. Just a low, gravelly voice saying, "Think about your choices, Lorna. This is your father." I sat in the break room, my tuna sandwich untouched, as the cold realization sank in. He had no boundaries left. I was no longer a person to him. I was a piece of property. And this, my space, my life, my autonomy, was something he believed he could bend, claim, or bully into submission. I wasn't just angry, I was exhausted. I started seeing a therapist. Again, I hadn't gone in years, not since the divorce. But this opened up old wounds I hadn't realized were still festering. I'd always thought I'd moved past the emotional neglect, that I had somehow healed. But healing isn't a straight line. Sometimes you think you're fine until your father shows up trying to steal your home and rewrite your life history like you owe him something. My therapist, Aylin, was gentle but firm. You're grieving the father you wanted to have, and the sister you needed growing up, and the mother who used to keep the chaos from spilling over. And she was right. I was grieving something intangible. Not the apartment, not even the confrontation. I was mourning the idea that maybe, just maybe, they'd come around someday. That the validation I pretended not to care about would eventually show up on its own. It didn't. About a month after the building incident, Nina texted again. Just one line. I think we need to talk. I didn't want to, but I also didn't want the story to be written without me. If there was going to be a conversation, I needed to be in it. Not as the scapegoat, not as the problem child, as someone who has a voice and a very firm boundary. We met in the cafe near Grand Central, midway between her Upper East Side bubble and my Brooklyn corner of the world. She wore her usual minimalist outfit, slacks, blouse, no makeup, but still glowing like a magazine cover. Meanwhile, I looked like someone who'd come off a night shift, because I had. She didn't start with, hello. I know Dad crossed a line, she said. I didn't realize how far he'd gone until I talked to Calvin, the doorman. She nodded. Yeah, I went to your building. I wanted to see how bad it was. He told me the whole thing. I sipped my coffee slowly, watching her face. She looked tired, older. Not in years, but in weight. The weight of finally seeing things she had ignored. Why are you really here, Nina? She didn't answer right away. Her hand traced the rim of her mug like it held answers. He's asking me for money now, she said finally. Big money. He wants to buy a condo in Florida. He says he wants to spend the rest of his life near the ocean, but he's calling it an investment for the family. I raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. In his name? She nodded, eyes wide with shame. I didn't say, I told you so. I didn't need to. I think I was his plan A, she said, and you were his plan B. Now he's panicking because neither of us are playing along. I leaned back in my chair. He's not panicking. He's scheming. It's what he does. There was a pause between us. Not of silence, but of history. A canyon of unresolved tension stretching back to our childhood. To birthday parties where I got socks and she got concert tickets. To dinners where my opinions were laughed off and hers were praised. To all the little things we never said out loud. I always thought you had it easier, she said suddenly. I blinked. You were the favorite. I was, she said, but that came with its own trap. I had to be perfect. I had to agree with him, even when he was wrong. If I ever stood up to him, he'd freeze me out for weeks. I was terrified of losing his approval, and I was terrified of never getting it. That line hung in the air like fog. She reached across the table, tentative, unsure. Her fingers brushed mine. We've both been stuck in different ways. We talked for another hour. About Mom, about our childhood, about all the ways Victor shaped us, hurt us, controlled us. And for the first time, I felt something shift between us. Not resolution, but recognition. She saw me, not as the dramatic sister, not as the rebellious one, but as a woman who simply refused to be controlled anymore. When we parted, she didn't promise to fix anything. Neither did I. But the truth had been spoken aloud, and there's no going back after that. A week passed before I heard from Victor again. This time, it came in the form of a certified letter. No handwriting, just typed legalese. Likely something he paid a notary down the street to help him draft. It wasn't an official court document, but it was dressed to look like one. It demanded a formal meeting to discuss familial property reassignment and claimed I had benefited from his sacrifices long enough. I read it twice before tossing it on the kitchen counter. Then I laughed. Not a loud laugh, more like a dry exhale. The kind that comes when you're too tired to be angry. That man really believed he had a case, or at least enough gall to pretend he did. My lawyer Mel reviewed it and confirmed it was completely unenforceable and blatantly manipulative. We sent a second letter and added a clause instructing him not to send further written communication. It was a strange thing. Lawyer letters between father and daughter. But nothing about this was normal anymore. The truth was, Victor wasn't acting out of desperation. He was acting out of habit. A lifetime of control doesn't just dissolve because someone tells him no. He'd shaped his life around power dynamics, his job, his marriage, even his parenting. He didn't know another way to be. When you grow up in that kind of atmosphere, it leaves residue. I saw it every time I hesitated before making a decision. Every time I heard his voice in my head, warning me about being too proud or too independent. Even after all these years, I still double-checked myself, still wrestled with guilt that didn't belong to me. And now I was done with that. But the family hadn't caught up. My Aunt Sylvia called next. She always sounds like she's about to cry, even when she's just reading you the weather. She said she was worried about me, that Victor was heartbroken, that he walked around their backyard muttering about losing everything and how ungrateful children turn out. "I'm not a child anymore," I said. "I know, Mija, but..." "There is no but. He tried to take my home." Her voice cracked a little. "He's your father." "Exactly. Not my landlord, not my heir, not my legal dependent." She was quiet. I could hear her sigh. That long, weary sigh of someone stuck between what they know is right and what they've been taught to accept. "Can I be honest?" she said finally. I waited. "I think your mother would have protected you if she were still alive. I think she's the only reason he didn't pull this kind of thing years ago." I closed my eyes. I knew she was right. My mother, quiet as she was, had always found subtle ways to keep Victor in check. She used gentle redirection, soft contradiction, and private words behind closed doors. I didn't appreciate it back then. I thought she was enabling him. But maybe she was just doing what she could with the limited power she had. Without her, he had no governor, no buffer, no one to restrain his worst impulses. And so, he unleashed them all on the one daughter who had the audacity to live outside his expectations. That's when I started to think about what accountability actually looks like. It's not just refusing to engage. It's redefining your entire relationship with someone. It's not about punishing them. It's about protecting yourself from being pulled back into the cycle. And that required more than a lawyer. It required clarity. It required space. And it required me to let go of any hope that Victor would ever say the words I secretly longed to hear. "I'm proud of you. I was wrong. You did it on your own, and that's incredible." Because he wasn't going to say those things. A few days later, I ran into Calvin again in the lobby. He handed me my mail and smiled. "Haven't seen your dad hanging around anymore." "Let's hope it stays that way," I said. He left a package. Once Calvin added, "Said it was yours. Didn't feel right taking it." My stomach turned. "I still got it in the office. Wasn't sure if I should toss it." I asked him to hand it over. Inside was a cheap black and gold picture frame. Inside it, a photo I hadn't seen in decades. Me, at age 12, holding up a science fair ribbon. I remembered that day clearly. I'd begged Victor to come. He arrived late and left early. Barely. Glanced at the poster board I'd spent all night working on. I'd assumed he'd forgotten. Behind the photo was a sticky note folded in half. I opened it. It said, "You're still my daughter." That means something, but it wasn't an apology. It wasn't even acknowledgement. It was just another claim. That phrase, "You're still my daughter," landed like a rock in my chest. Not because it was tender, but because it was a reminder. A possession. A statement of fact, meant to reassert the thing he was clinging to. Ownership. I slipped the note back behind the frame and placed it face down in a drawer. I couldn't throw it away. Not yet. But I didn't need it on display, either. The next week, Nina and I talked again. This time, over wine at my place. She looked around, like she hadn't really seen it before. The framed art prints, the well-worn rug, the quiet hum of the radiator. She kept commenting on the space. "It really feels like you," she said. "It is me." She nodded, then added, "He asked me to co-sign a loan last week." I laughed, but it wasn't funny. "I told you," I said. "You're the new target." "I didn't do it," she said quickly. "Because you didn't want to, or because you finally saw the pattern?" She looked at me with a mix of guilt and relief. Both. We sat in silence for a while, just sipping and existing in the same space. Not arguing, not competing, not avoiding anything. "He used to tell me you were too emotional," she said. "That you'd never succeed unless you hardened up." I raised my glass. "Guess I'm soft and successful." That made her laugh. Really laugh. We talked until midnight. About Mom. About the things we wished we could ask her now. About what it meant to be daughters of a man like Victor. About how strange it was to still crave love from someone who used it as currency. And that night, I realized something. Sometimes the real inheritance isn't money, or property, or keepsakes. Sometimes it's the damage. And sometimes the only way to break that cycle is to stop pretending the damage is normal. Over the next couple of months, Victor fell mostly silent. The silence was strategic. I recognized that he wasn't retreating because he'd given up. He was planning his next angle, and he had plenty of time. What he didn't have anymore was access. I'd sealed every entry point, emotionally, legally, even digitally. I blocked his number, gave Calvin permission to turn him away at the door. I even warned my building's HOA about future fraud attempts, and to their credit, they flagged my unit internally. No documents regarding ownership could be processed without my in-person approval, notarized. Victor couldn't touch me, and that infuriated him. I didn't hear it directly, but word trickled through the usual family pipeline. "He was ashamed of me," he said. I was turning into one of those selfish women who forget their roots. At a birthday party I skipped, he allegedly told a second cousin that Nina had failed him too, since she refused to loan him money after our last talk. The web of his control was collapsing, thread by thread. But I wasn't satisfied yet. Not really. It wasn't enough to block him. I wanted him to feel, in a tangible way, the full weight of what he tried to take from me. That's when I got an idea. It started with a simple concept. Use the very thing he wanted to claim as proof that he never owned it. It had always bothered me how much of my story had been flattened or ignored by the family. They believed whatever Victor said, that I'd done fine because of him, that my apartment was some kind of family asset, not a personal achievement. And in their eyes, Nina was still the polished one, and I was still the bitter one. So I decided to reframe the narrative, literally. I partnered with a local community foundation in Brooklyn that focuses on helping women rebuild after domestic abuse. I started volunteering quietly at first, then I joined their housing committee. I told them my story, leaving a controlling marriage, rebuilding alone, fighting to keep what I earned from a family that wanted to rewrite the terms. They invited me to speak. The event was small, maybe 50 women in a local church hall, but it felt like standing on a mountaintop. I talked about generational power, about silence, about how hard it is to say no when your no is met with shame. I shared pieces of my story I'd never said out loud, not just about Victor, but about Javier, about the nights I cried on a bathroom floor wondering if I'd ever feel whole. And then I told them about the apartment, not because it's glamorous, but because it represents what I built in the aftermath, my own name, my own door. That night, something clicked in me. A week later, I sent a video of the talk to a handful of people in the family. Just a link. No explanation. I sent one to Victor, too. He didn't respond. Of course he didn't. But I know he watched it, because Clara texted me 2 days later and said, "I had no idea. I'm sorry. You were right to protect yourself." Small victory, but it tasted sweet. That's when I took it one step further. I got the idea from Nina's husband, actually. He casually mentioned that an old friend of his had turned their personal story into a podcast episode and got a publishing deal out of it. It clicked immediately. I didn't want fame, but I wanted truth on record, undeniable. Something that could live on outside of Victor's narrative. So I pitched my story to a friend of a friend who worked at a digital media site. She loved it. We shaped it into a long-form personal essay. I kept names vague. I didn't call anyone out directly, but if you knew, you knew. It went viral in small circles, just enough attention that people around the city read it. Just enough that it landed in a newsletter Victor subscribes to, one about property and personal legacy. Of all things, he saw it. How do I know? Because he finally called from a new number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was thin, tight, and trying hard not to sound shaken. "I read your thing. Didn't expect you to take it that far. You've made your point. I hope it was worth it." I didn't call back, but I saved the voicemail. It was better than an apology. It was proof that he finally realized he'd lost. It was worth it. That same month, I formally added a clause to my will, directing that my apartment, when I eventually pass, will be sold, and 100% of the proceeds donated to the same foundation I volunteered for. A place for women like me, women with fathers like him. It was poetic almost. He tried to claim my home as his legacy, and now it's legally, permanently, not his, not even in death. I didn't tell him that part. I want him to spend the rest of his life wondering what I'll do next, what part of his illusion I'll unravel next, what else I'll take back, with a calm, quiet kind of fire. As for Nina, she's still navigating her own shift. She doesn't call him as often. She's cautious, measured. But when we talk, it's real now. No more pretense. She recently told me she's thinking of writing something too, something about growing up in the shadow of a father's approval. Maybe she will, maybe she won't. But the fact that she could, that she wants to, is enough for now. Victor still lives in Yonkers, still insists he's misunderstood. But fewer people are listening. His grip has loosened. His stories are starting to sound like what they are, distortions. And me? I walk around my apartment barefoot now. The light hits the plants just right in the morning. The radiator hisses, but it's a comforting sound. I open the window and let the city in. This space is mine, not because someone gave it to me, but because I refuse to give it away.